So, today I want to talk about the most important skill in telling great stories, and that's coming up with amazing characters. If you can come up with amazing, compelling characters that people want to watch, then you might as well print money because there are whole billion-dollar franchises that are built entirely off somebody's amazing characters. So, that's what I want to talk about, is creating characters, where to start, what makes characters great. I'm going to tell you everything I know about characters, and hopefully after this video you'll be able to flesh out your own characters and your stories and, make them more three-dimensional. So let's get into it. So if you're staring at a blank canvas and you're trying to come up with a character, I want you to focus on these 5 traits before you think of anything else. Age, how old your character is. Physical description, how does your character look like? Is your character tall, short, skinny, fat, male, female, black, white, you name it. All that goes under physical description. Number 3 is occupation. What does your character do for a living? How does he earn his money? And under occupation, I would also include what your character does for love and passion. What are his hobbies? Sometimes his hobbies and his passion is his work, but other times they're 2 separate things. So I would include all that under occupation. Number 4 is relationship status. Is your character married? Do they have a girlfriend, boyfriend? Are they single? Do they have kids? All that I would include under relationship status. And number 5, the last thing, what does your character eat? As simple as that sounds, you'd be surprised at how many writers don't think of this. And let me tell you something. A character who wakes up in the morning and smokes a cigarette, has a drip coffee, and eats a Twinkie from the gas station, well, that's a totally different character than somebody who wakes up in the morning and has egg white scramble with avocado, steel cut oatmeal with blueberries. All right? Those are 2 totally different characters. So what your character eats is super important. You are what you eat. So you should think about this and include that. So those 5 traits: age, physical description, occupation, relationship status, and what does your character eat. Before we move on, I want to talk about backstory. Now, it's important to think about your character's backstory. I like to do timelines with major events that really shaped your character's worldview. But for the sake of this lesson, I don't want to focus too much on backstory. I want to focus on the here and the now. Why are we watching these characters now? Because this is more important than what happened before. If not, the movie would be in the past. So yes, all right, I want to focus on the here and the now. So moving on, introducing your character. The character introduction. Now, this is probably going to be the first scene in your movie, or first couple pages. So the formula for a good character intro is you basically want your character to be doing his thing, but to the max. Like, you want him at work doing his thing, but it's like a crazy day at work and it's super hectic. So let me give you some examples. Indiana Jones. Now, Indiana Jones is a professor, and he's also an archaeologist. But they don't start the movie with him in a classroom teaching students. All right, the first scene in the movie, he's in the jungle. All right, we got the cowboy shot. We see his whip and his gun, and he's putting together a treasure map, and there's bad guys closing in on him, and then he pulls out his whip and disarms them and does his Indiana Jones thing. He's like in the middle of this crazy adventure. And so that's what you want your character introduction to be like. You want your character to be doing his thing, but to the max. Another example is Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad, the first scene is Walt driving an RV in the middle of the desert. He has a gas mask on. He's naked. Pinkman is riding shotgun. He also has a gas mask. There's a dead body rolling around in the back. There's bullet holes everywhere. There's chemical beakers smashing on the ground. It's crazy. And that's what you want your character intro to be. They could have showed Walt in high school teaching his chemistry class, but no, they show him doing his thing, and it's a crazy day at work. So that's what you want your character intro to be. Another way to introduce your character is what they call the save the cat scene. This is one of those old Hollywood screenwriting tropes where you show your character early on doing something good, saving a cat from a tree, and the audience is supposed to root for them. Look, I think it's kind of tropey, but there's a twist on that is super powerful. I don't even know the name for it. I call it the save the cat, but have your hero be punished for it. Let me give you an example. The Patriot, Mel Gibson, the American Revolution. There's a scene early on in that movie where there's a big battle right in front of Mel Gibson's farm, and he starts taking in the wounded soldiers. But, he's treating both sides, the Americans and the British. He's treating all the wounded soldiers. After the battle, our main antagonist, the British officer, the colonel, steps in and sees that Mel Gibson is treating the rebels, but he's also treating his own men. But still, he burns down Mel Gibson's farm and kidnaps his eldest son and shoots one of his younger sons. So Mel Gibson is trying to do the right thing, and he's severely punished for it. And the next scene is Mel Gibson with a hatchet and a knife, and he's slaughtering 20 redcoats. It's the best scene in the whole movie. So it's a super powerful way to introduce your character. It's the save the cat scene, but have your hero be punished for it. Preferably by the villain or one of the villain's henchmen, someone connected to the villain. After we introduce our character, you're going to have to make a writer decision here. Is your character going to be active or passive? There are two kinds of characters, active characters and passive characters. So active characters are go-getters. They're characters who are constantly in motion, constantly pushing the story forward, going after things, initiating things. Usually our main character is active. Active characters are usually more compelling. Passive characters, on the other hand, these are characters who are more wait and see. They sit back, they let things happen to them, or they let things unfold and they react to the world. Usually you want your main character to be active. Think of Training Day. Denzel Washington, super active character. The partner is super passive. It's a good mix. That's what you want, actually. You want to mix it up. Throw in some passive characters alongside active characters. But a well-written and well-executed passive character can be super compelling also. Think of Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump, he's the ultimate passive character. I mean, he sits back. He's basically a low IQ person, and he's tied up in all these huge world events, and he doesn't even know it. And so passive characters can be compelling too. But the key is you want to mix it up. Sometimes you can even have a hybrid where you have a character who is very passive but then becomes active. And that's part of his transformation. When I think of a movie like The Matrix, Neo's character, he starts off very passive. He's very skeptical of everything. He doesn't exactly trust the world. And as the story unfolds and he begins to believe in himself, he becomes very active. So yeah, sometimes you can mix it up within the same person. But the key is you need to be aware of these things. And you need to do this with intention. You can't be all vague and wishy-washy about this stuff. You have to know your characters in and out and write them with intention. So after we introduce your character and we get to know them, you're going to start introducing conflict. That's basically what the movie is, all right? You have a series of escalating conflicts from our inciting incident to the climax of the movie. Is just basically conflict. You want it to be escalating. Obviously, your GSU has to be there, goals, stakes, urgency. But how do we create conflict? There's two kinds of conflicts. There's external conflict and there's internal conflict. External conflict is conflict that arises from the environment or other characters. And internal conflict is conflict that comes from within the character. So if your character has a flaw or a vice, or maybe your character has unresolved issues from the past, preferably has unresolved issues with another character in the story, and this is where you're combining the conflict. You want your character to be going through external conflict, but you also want him to be going through internal conflict as well. You want him, basically, he's at war with the world, but your character is also at war with himself. You want both conflicts, and preferably you want the external and the internal conflict to be playing off each other in some way. So to give you an example, the movie Flight, another Denzel Washington movie. In this movie, Denzel plays a airplane pilot who's also a drug addict and an alcoholic. One day, he's flying his plane and he runs into some technical issues and there's engine problems and the plane starts going down, and in the heat of the moment, the stress is high. You have this character who is facing all this external conflict, but he is hungover. He is a drug addict. His mind is, he's going through an internal battle as well. And it just makes for a great scene. And this is what I'm talking about. All right, you got internal conflict, you got external conflict, and they're feeding off each other. So while your character is trying to accomplish his goals, and you're throwing all this conflict their way, all these obstacles, one thing you have to keep in mind is how difficult you have to make things for your character. You have to make things extremely difficult for your main character. Because nowadays, I think audiences have gotten smart and they've become immune to a lot of these screenwriting tropes. It's very predictable. I watch so much movies that when I see conflict unfolding, I know how it's going to play out. I know how it's going to end 20 pages before the end. And audiences are not stupid anymore. So it really takes a lot of clever plotting by you to get the audiences to buy in. You want your audiences to buy into the sense of doubt that your characters won't succeed. Because this is a movie. And we all know in the movie the hero gets what he wants eventually. So you have to make things so difficult for your hero that your audience is like, whoa, how the hell is he going to get out of that one? Like, how is this going to end? That's what you want. So, when your character is overcoming all these obstacles and resolving all this conflict, another important thing that you should keep in mind is that your character needs to get out of the mess he's in through his own actions. You can't just have things play out in his favor. All right? Your main character needs to succeed or fail through his own actions. So, the next thing I want to talk about is character arcs or character transformations. There are two kinds of character arcs. There's static arcs. These are characters that don't change much. They stay the same throughout the whole movie, more or less. And dynamic arcs. And these are characters that change. Change their behavior, maybe they change their worldview, but they go through changes throughout the story. One of these old school screenwriting tropes tells you that you have to arc your main character, but that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of characters that are static, but they're very compelling characters, they're very strong characters. Think of a character like the Terminator. Very strong, compelling character, doesn't change much, and that's what makes them strong. When I think of a character like Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean, that's a character that, from beginning to end, Jack Sparrow is Jack Sparrow. He doesn't change much. In that movie, Orlando Bloom's character, that's the character that goes through all the changes. You don't have to shoehorn this transformative character arc when it doesn't need it. And no doubt, when you have a character who transform, it's very powerful. I'll give you an example, the movie American History X. Edward Norton's character, he starts off as a neo-Nazi. He goes to jail, and amongst black people, he changes, and then he comes out of jail, he's a different person. It's super powerful, that movie. Another example, of course, Breaking Bad. Walter White, who starts off as this geeky high school chemistry teacher, and then he becomes like this Pablo Escobar of the meth world. That's a super powerful transformation. But there are other characters, very iconic characters, that are not that don't transform, that are very static, but they're strong characters as well. So you don't have to have your main character go through these transformations, but you should have a character in the movie go through it. Even amongst all of that, how do we give our character that extra oomph? How do you make your character really pop? Give him that sauce. Well, you could do this through your character's personality. Is your character funny? Charming? Is he good with girls? Give him some wit, give him some jokes. Maybe your character is smart, but nerdy and shy. Do this to all your characters. This is the shy one. This is the one that's good with the girls. This is the big, strong, but dumb one. Have a variety. Maybe you have an antagonist who is super greedy and selfish, and he's a prick and he's arrogant, all right? That's a compelling character. How your character treats other characters. That's huge. The audience judges whether your character is good or bad by how he treats other characters. Go through each of your characters and give them personalities and make them different from one another. So the key to nailing down these character personalities is what they call gray morality, the balance, the yin and the yang. So you have your protagonist, our hero, who is pure white, all good, but just a little bit of black in him, all right? Just a little bit of evil. And then you have our villain, who is pure bad. He's dark, he's evil, but you give him a little bit of good. And that's what's going to make your character really feel three-dimensional. It's going to give your character a lot of depth. So let me give you an example of this. Breaking Bad. Of course, I'm going to refer to Breaking Bad. Walter White. This is the ultimate gray character. All right? He's super smart. He has a disabled son. His wife is pregnant. He works 2 jobs. He's dying of cancer. What is there not to root for this guy? He's super relatable, but at the same time, he's super arrogant. He's kind of selfish. He's a little crazy. He murders people. He poisoned the kid. He planted a bomb in a nursing home. The guy is crazy, but you're rooting for him. You want him to succeed. And meanwhile, Hank, our quote-unquote villain, he's the one doing all the good stuff, chasing the bad guys, but we don't want him to succeed. We want him to fail. We want Walt to win. So a good antagonist-protagonist relationship is one where the villain could be the hero too. That's the best way to say it. His intentions, his motivations are so clear and so right in his own head. And yeah, maybe he's bad, but you throw in some gray morals in there and, let me tell you, there's probably some audience members that wanted Hank to win and they wanted Walt to go down. Another example is the show Turn. This is a historical drama about spies in the American Revolution. Super amazing show. There's some great character work in that show. Our main villain is a British officer. I think he's based on a real historical figure, but his name is Simcoe, and he's like an incredible soldier, warrior. He's super brutal, super ruthless. He kills people left to right, very tall, but he's soft-spoken. And he speaks very quietly and soft and with British accent, and it's kind of weird. And even though he tortures people, he treats his own men and his own soldiers below him very well. He has them well dressed, he gives them great uniforms, but he's torturing people. And he's very anti-slavery. He's like a staunch anti-slavery person, while there's a lot of good characters in the show that have slaves. And our main villain is very anti-slavery. So it flips everything on its head. But when you give your characters those kind of contrasting traits, it just gives them so much depth. Another quick example of, think of the show House of Cards. Frank Underwood, like this super serious politician. He's always into his politics and always about business, but he comes home and he plays Call of Duty and he plays video games, and it's kind of bizarre. One scene he's talking to the president about all these serious stuff, and the next scene he's like playing video games. It doesn't have to be just good and bad traits. It could just be, give your character this quirky trait that just contrasts with who they are. So last example, American Beauty. This movie's incredible, and it breaks so many conventions. There's no goals, no stakes, no urgency. There's not a lot going on, really. Our main character, Lester, super passive, but he is very dynamic. He's having a midlife crisis and he's going through all these changes. You have the wife who's super uptight, always cleaning, has everything perfect, but she cheats on her husband and she shoots guns for a hobby. Contrasting traits. Then you have the neighbor, one of the best characters in the story. He's this like military guy, super strict. He collects Nazi relics, but he is a closet homosexual. And then you have the teenage daughter who is, she's like super gothic and wears makeup and like dresses all unattractive, but she's like super hot. She's very good looking, and she wants to get a breast reduction. The characters are crazy. Like I said, there's so many. That movie is so unpredictable. Halfway through the story, our main character finally has a goal. He's trying to sleep with his daughter's best friend who's underage. So the goals are super sketchy, but you want him to succeed. And the last minute, as soon as he's about to get his goal, he rejects it and changes his mind. So it's just such an incredible story. You're constantly questioning, where is this going to go? That's what you want. You want that unpredictableness, all right? So I know this was a long video, a lot of information. I'm going to round it all up. You want to start off with those 5 traits: age, physical description, relationship status, occupation. What does your character eat? Are you going to make him active, passive?
creating that conflict, you want inner and outer conflict, ramping it up. You want your character to resolve the conflicts through his own actions, and adding that personality, adding some gray morals, some contrasting traits, really rounding out your character, making them three-dimensional. And even with all that, it's not guaranteed your character is going to be amazing, but you may have a chance.